The music industry is in complete shock as shocking reports from various sources indicate that what was supposed to be a triumphant reunion concert devolved into an all-out brawl. Miami's iconic pillars, Jim Jones and Cameron, have reportedly been arrested after a violent altercation backstage that left security stunned and fans speechless. Witnesses say it began as a heated argument over the performance order but swiftly turned into something much darker, with broken equipment, shattered egos, and flashing police lights within minutes. Yes, you heard that. Read a war between two former brothers-in-arms with fists thrown, harsh words exchanged, and pure chaos in the aftermath. Is this really the end of Dipset? Fans asked in shock as social media erupted after Cameron and Jim were allegedly cuffed and taken away. While cameras rolled, what could have caused such a public outburst between two legends? Stay tuned, because what's coming next isn't just shocking. It's the kind of unadulterated emotional drama that nobody anticipated. And believe us, this is just the beginning. It all began on a night that was meant to be a celebration, with fans flocking to see the eagerly anticipated reunion of Freaky Ziggy, Jim Jones, and Dipset Cameron. The venue was a hive of nostalgia, filled with people sporting vintage Dipset merchandise, listening to old songs on their phones, and sharing tales of how these artists influenced a whole hip-hop era. However, no one realized that tension had been building behind the scenes for weeks, and tonight it was going to explode in a way that would alter everything. Words started to circulate at midnight, and whispers turned into, it was initially difficult to discern what was happening due to the shaky footage, blurred faces, and muffled yelling in the frantic social media posts and video clips that soon surfaced from backstage. However, it was evident that Run and Jim Jones were engaged in a heated argument, and it wasn't just verbal. Chairs were overturned, equipment was smashed, and voices were raised to deafening levels. Fans were shocked, perplexed, and devastated by the videos, which showed two brothers who had once been inseparable fighting just minutes before they were scheduled to share the stage. According to sources, the altercation started over a seemingly insignificant change, and Jim Jones reportedly wanted to start the show with his when old wounds were reopened. What should have been a small argument turned into a full-blown conflict. Jim accused Cam of constantly attempting to control the spotlight, while Cam responded that Jim was disloyal and that he had gone solo when the group was disintegrating. As the situation rapidly worsened, the room was crowded with security guards, stylists, all attempting to calm down, but neither man was backing down. One crew member described the fight as emotional and not just physical, saying things that had been buried for years. Jim reportedly screamed, "You left me out." The insults turned into shoves, and the shoves turned into punches. It was like watching a family fall apart in front of us. "To dry when I needed you most," Cam retorted. "You've always been jealous of me." Those close to the group acknowledged that, even though they had previously made amends in public, their differences had never been fully resolved. Tonight, behind closed doors, all of the forced interviews and fake smiles were undone in a matter of seconds as the chaos unfolded backstage. Fans outside were becoming agitated because the show had been postponed for more than an hour, and people were starting to chant without understanding what was happening. Little did they know that their favorite artists were being handcuffed just a few feet away, and police had arrived. When officers arrived on the scene of a violent altercation that left two staff members injured, one with a busted lip and the other with a sprained wrist from attempting to separate Cam and Jim, they discovered both rappers clearly bruised and still screaming at one another as they were being pulled apart. A video of their arrest went viral right away, and one of the crew members captured Cameron being escorted out in cuffs, his face red with rage. The crowd outside the venue watched in shock as the two were led into separate police cars shortly after his chain tore his voice from yelling. Some fans screamed their names, while others simply recorded the moment in stunned silence. What was supposed to be a triumphant return had now become a nightmare, and media outlets picked up the story. Within, social media was flooded with stories about the Dipset reunion ending in chaos and Cameron and Jim Jones being arrested after a backstage altercation. People started posting old videos of the two of them laughing together in interviews, recalling their bond and contrasting it with the violent fallout that had just happened. For many fans, the betrayal felt personal because they raised us. One Twitter user wrote, "We grew up on Dipset." Inside the jail that night, neither Cam nor Jim spoke to one another. They were placed in separate holding cells, and despite the prompt arrival of their legal teams, the damage had already been done. Some people were shocked, others were furious, and some said they saw coming from a mile away. It feels like our big brothers fighting. According to an insider, Jim kept pacing, asking how it got to this point. Cam just sat with his head down. It was the silence after the storm, and it said more than any punch ever. Those close to the situation said that both men were shaken not only from the fight, but also from the reality of how far they have fallen. Someone on the crew claims that Jill Santana, who was getting ready in his dressing room when the altercation started, attempted to mediate once he noticed things were getting heated, but by the time he got to them, it was too late. Jules yelled, "Not like this, man. Not after everything we've been through." Insiders claim that he broke down backstage and needed to be comforted by his team after witnessing two of his closest friends being dragged away by police. The fallout was immediate. As sponsors withdrew from the tour, fans demanded refunds, and concert promoters started re-evaluating future Dipset shows. Industry insiders whispered that this could be the last nail in the coffin, as they were already on thin ice. Promoter, this might be the end. Social media only made the drama worse as fans argued over who was at fault. Some accused Cameron of being overbearing, while others accused Jim of being aggressive and insecure. Regardless of the side people took, there was a clear consensus that it might be over, but even in the middle of there were voices demanding peace, and other musicians expressed their sorrow and hope for peace on social media. One message said, "Come on, dip up. You guys are bigger than this. Fix it before it's too late." Another said, "Hip-hop needs you all together, not split apart like this." As the dust settled and the city attempted to comprehend what had just transpired, it was unclear whether or not Cam and Jim would hear those words. However, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Just when everyone believed the drama had peaked, an unexpected event occurred the following morning. That a leaked voicemail, purportedly from Jim Jones, who was still in custody hours after the fight, started making the rounds online the following morning, just as everyone thought the drama had reached its climax. Jim's voice was low, exhausted, and filled with pain. He spoke slowly, as if every word mattered. "I'm not even angry at Cameron," he stated, adding, "I'm angry at myself because we let the fans and Dipet down." At first, no one could verify that the tape was authentic, but it quickly went viral, and by noon, prominent hip-hop websites were reposting it with captions such as "The end of Dipset hits harder than we thought," and "Jim Jones regrets everything." Fans were divided. Some sympathized with him after hearing his voice of regret, while others wondered if the message was a shrewd attempt to curry favor behind the scenes. Things were much more chaotic than anyone had anticipated, according to those close to him. Cameron had not publicly spoken, sent any tweets or Instagram stories, or even posted a cryptic message. He was not only about the fight, but also about how fast Jim's camp had begun damage control. He believes Jim is attempting to manipulate the story, and one insider said Cam feels deceived once more. In an attempt to prevent everything from utterly collapsing, Jules Santana started contacting both camps and enticing them to meet and discuss the situation. However, neither Cam nor Jim was prepared. They were both too emotionally invested and consumed by years of unresolved tension. Even Freaky Zeke, who had always been the comic relief, fell silent. In a brief statement, his team expressed his deep sadness over the events and asked fans to give the group time to recover. What made matters worse was that the fight had not only hurt Dipet, but it also caused old wounds in the hip-hop community. Artists who had previously admired the group started to speak out. Some sharing their disappointment, others sharing stories of past tensions they had personally witnessed. And one anonymous, the producer, told a blog that he had witnessed Cam and Jim quarrel over money during a recording session years prior, and that the brotherhood had been eroding for a while. Suddenly, the facade of unity that Dipset had attempted to preserve burst apart, and then the security footage arrived late. That evening, a fresh clip was leaked from the venue's backstage surveillance camera, which was different from this fan film video, which was clearer than previous ones. Captured the moment Cameron pushed Jim into a stack of speaker cases, followed by Jim swinging back and toppling a table. The video was silent, but the violence was so obvious that fans were appalled at their hero's actions. Additional footage showed crew members frantically trying to break up the altercation as Jules ran in, as a security guard pushed Cam back against a wall while attempting to pull Jim away. The video rekindled the internet, and hashtags like #Dips, Set Downfall, and #Cams, started trending. News outlets analyzed every frame like a sports replay, and body language experts even weighed in, stating that Cam's stance sealed depruded while Jim's movement exposed emotional instability. It turned into a media circus, with memes going viral, interviews being requested, and even talk shows mentioning the fight as the week's biggest pop culture event. However, behind the scenes, the consequences were becoming very real. And the label that was funding the Dipset tour put everything on hold. Future dates were canceled, contracts were frozen, and all reunion-related merchandise was removed from the shelves. One insider called the situation a financial catastrophe. And Cam's team blamed him, accusing him of being manipulative and controlling. Dozens of staff, dancers, and tech crew members were caught in the middle, and they claimed that Jim's temper had ruined everything. After relying on the tour for work, Cameron, who is known for his savage clapbacks and sharp tongue, abruptly quit his job. 2 days later, he posted a black screen on Instagram with a single sentence: "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words," leaving fans perplexed. Was it acceptance, shade, or the end? In the meantime, Jim Jones made a brief, obviously tearful, Instagram Live saying we're supposed to be legends, not a headline. "I'm ashamed of how I acted. I lost my cool, but I'm not the only one." While some pleaded for a truce, others criticized Cam for being passive-aggressive. As expected, this only added fuel to the fire. Cam's fans accused Jim of gaslighting. Jim's fans defended him, saying at least he was owning up. And in the middle of all this turmoil, Dipset's legacy was gradually coming apart. Unsure of the public's reaction, radio stations removed Dipset songs from their daily playlists. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to the argument. Some suggested it was the most public group meltdown since MUA, while others likened it to the fall of June. One host stated, "This is what happens when ego goes unchecked for too long." Then, in the biggest twist of all, a woman came forward and said she had seen the fight and that it had nothing to do with music but rather a woman. According to her, Cameron and Jim Jones had been romantically involved with the same woman for years, and recent events had rekindled that tension. She said Jim had found out that Cam had secretly reconnected with her, and that's what started the backstage argument. No one could confirm her story, but the internet didn't care because it was juicy, scandalous, and exactly the kind of twist that fans love. Now, the fight is being framed as a failed love triangle, with people making jokes about Dipset being the new reality show drama, and others complaining that two legends shouldn't waste decades of legacy over a woman. Whether the story was true or not, it altered the narrative once more. People were watching lives unfold in real time, not just a group breakup, and they couldn't turn away. By this point, Jim and Cam were both out on bail but were required by the court to keep apart until the case was settled. The irony that these two men had the hip-hop community waited to see what would happen next. When one experienced artist stated in a radio interview, "This isn't beef, this is heartbreak." They had formerly toured the world together but were now unable to be in the same room because of lawyers, damage control teams, and overtime. However, at the exact moment when, as the days went by and the public waited in anticipation, tensions continued to rise behind the scenes as Cameron and Jim Jones dealt with more than just their personal transgression. They were also dealing with the fallout from their actions, which affected fans, the media, and even their close friends. It seemed like everything had reached its lowest point, when a surprise phone call was made that no one saw coming and that would change everything going forward. The truth was that nobody really knew what the future held for Dipset. Could they salvage what remained of their legacy, or had the damage been irreparable? Cameron, who was known for his cool demeanor, had been unusually quiet following the incident, and his social media accounts, which were typically filled with jokes and cryptic messages, had turned into Cameron was always the one to turn a situation into something humorous. But this time, there was no humor in his posts. He wasn't even posting in his eerily silent fans, especially those who had supported him for years, were beginning to worry that they hadn't seen him like this before. On the other hand, Jones was more outspoken on Twitter, was full of remarks about the situation, including an apology to fans, Dipet supporters, and even Cameron. "It's been a rough road, but I'm learning and growing," he tweeted. But fans weren't totally convinced. Some applauded him for taking responsibility for his mistakes, while others believed it was just another ploy to win back the love he had lost from real men. "Doesn't change the fact that the damage is done, and we won't forget what happened, Jim," one fan wrote. The mixed reactions only seemed to add fuel to the fire. But despite the drama and public division, there was a sense of inevitability. The big question, however, remained looming over everything with Dipset's permanent breakup. Was this the end of one of the most iconic hip-hop groups of all time? Fans were divided. Some still believed in the group's strength and the bond that had brought them together years ago, while others felt betrayed and their loyalty shaken to the core. Meanwhile, rumors were rife, with some sources saying that Cameron and Jim Jones hadn't spoken in days, and others suggesting that a reunion was possible, but only under certain conditions. Meanwhile, Jules Santana, who had always been the mediator between the two, he was caught in the middle of everything. According to people close to him, Jules was upset and frustrated by the whole situation. He had worked so hard to keep Cam and Jim amicable, and now it seemed like all of that work was falling apart. But he was determined to put things right, because he knew that if there was any chance of healing things, it had to begin with. Jules decided to take matters into his own hands and contacted Jim Jones and Cameron separately in an attempt to set up a private meeting. He knew that it had to be in person. There couldn't be any more phone calls or cryptic messages. It had to be genuine. After a few tense days, Jules was able to both Cameron and Jim Jones in the same room. Was a historic moment because it was the first time since the fight that the two had decided to talk. However, the atmosphere was tense when they finally sat down, and Cameron, who is known for his sharp tongue and quick wit, was unusually quiet. Jim Jones, on the other hand, was more forthcoming because he had been considering the repercussions of his actions and was prepared to address. Cannon's voice was steady but had an unmistakable edge. "You know, Jim," he said slowly, "I never thought I'd be sitting here with you after what happened. You disrespected me." The room was filled with an awkward silence as the two men sat opposite each other, the weight of their past and recent fallout hanging heavy in the air, and in front of hurting family members as well as fans. I know, and I can't take it back, but I'm here now and I want to fix this. I want us to get past this, Cam," Jim Jones said with obvious remorse. "You said that before, Jim, but actions speak louder than words." It was evident that there was still a lot of hurt and mistrust between them. But as the conversation went on, There were times when it seemed like a reconciliation was possible. Cameron paused for a moment as if weighing his options. For a moment, it seemed as though they were back in the studio together, creating magic, as they talked about their shared history and the times when Dipet was at the top of the rap game. However, reality soon set in. The damage had been done, and the road to recovery wouldn't be simple. Meanwhile, fans were still waiting for a public statement from both Cameron and Jim Jones. And the suspense was killing them. Fans flocked to social media to demand an update, asking whether Dipset was truly over or not. One fan wrote, "You both hurt the fans. Now you need to fix this." The pressure was mounting. Fans demanded answers, asking whether Dipset was truly over or if the two could work things out. When the time came, Cameron shared a brief but profound message on Instagram. "Sometimes the strongest bonds are tested. We've been through a lot. We'll figure it out. Stay tuned." Jim Jones then shared a message of his own genuine talk, saying, "We've been down too long. We're stronger. We're stronger." Then this stayed with us. These messages didn't provide any specific answers that gave fans hope that perhaps Dipset wasn't done after all. But the question still stood. Was it too little, too late for the fans to forgive them for the public spectacle of the fight and the betrayal, or had Cameron and Jim Jones gone too far and irreparably damaged the group? As the story developed, the hip-hop community closely watched as two legends who had once dominated the rap game together, Cameron and Jim Jones, battled for their legacy. Would they be able to move past their differences, or was it all over? The news of the backstage altercation spread like wildfire, rocking the hip-hop world. As the fight's details emerged, fans, media outlets, and even their peers in the industry were left in disbelief. What had started out as a night of celebration swiftly descended into chaos, and it now appeared as though the future of the venerable group Dipset itself was in jail. Its core members, Cameron and Jim Jones, were involved in a violent altercation that no one could have predicted. Years of unresolved tensions between the two artists reportedly contributed to the backstage altercation at the party. According to reports, words were exchanged before a physical altercation that resulted in the arrest of both Cameron and Jim Jones on the scene. The situation was described as intense, in addition to leaving a lasting impression on the event. The brawl left fans wondering if the two legendary figures could ever mend their strained relationship in the days that followed. Witnesses at the scene claimed that security had to intervene because the rappers were allegedly throwing punches and creating an unavoidable scene. Rumors about the fight's origins started to circulate like wildfire. Some said it was a personal argument between the two, while others pointed to deeper problems within the group. Fans who had previously viewed Cameron and Jim Jones as brothers in arms were now left wondering if they would ever be reunited following this public act of violence, or if this was the last straw that would end the group's legacy. And while some fans stayed optimistic, others expressed their dismay on social media, saying, "This is the end of an era." One post said, "Bebet was the best. But what hope do we have if they can't even get along?" The similar thoughts were expressed in comments as people tried to comprehend the abrupt dissolution of one of hip-hop's most significant groups. For years, Cameron and Jim Jones had served as the faces of Dipset, and now their feud was tarnishing everything they had created. Cameron, who never backs down from controversy, addressed the situation. In a series of posts on social media, he vented his frustration, saying that although he had attempted to keep the peace, the betrayal he experienced was too great to overlook. He wrote, "I did my part, but when you constantly have to watch your back, it's time to move on." His harsh remarks seemed to validate what many had feared, that Dipset as a group was no longer trustworthy, longer a viable entity. But even though Cameron's message appeared to mark the end of an era, Jim Jones was not prepared to give up just yet. Instead, he adopted a more reserved stance, though his feelings were obviously running high, and posted a message that suggested a reconciliation. We've experienced too much together to allow one argument to define us," he wrote, adding, "I'm not yet prepared to leave." For those who continued to believe in the connection between him and Cameron, his remarks offered some optimism. Would the two icons be able to set aside their disagreements and re-establish their previous relationship? Or was the harm to two? Repair? Hip-hop blogs, podcasts, and news channels all weighed in on the drama as it developed, with some outlets taking sides and others remaining impartial. Many questioned whether this public dispute was a temporary setback or a permanent fracture. The timing of the altercation was especially concerning because Dipset had been getting ready to embark on fans, had been waiting years for the trio to perform together again on a much-anticipated reunion tour. But it seemed like that dream was evaporating. In an exclusive interview, Jules Santana, who had always been caught in the middle of Cameron and Jim Jones' arguments, the situation and expressed his frustration, saying he had done everything in his power to maintain harmony between the two, but it was evident that both men had reached their breaking points. "We were brothers," said Jules, in a voice full of emotion, "but sometimes things change. People change, and I can't force something that isn't there anymore." His words captured the sadness and the inevitable nature of the situation. Apart from that, it felt like a family. "We need Dips to sit back together," one fan wrote on Instagram. "They were the best. Don't let this be the end." As the public fallout from the fight grew and the pressure on Cameron and Jim Jones increased, their fans were split, with some expressing their disappointment and rage and others still hoping for a resolution. However, as time passed, it became more and more obvious that there were more serious problems at hand, ones that could not be readily overlooked or forgotten. As Cameron and Jim Jones battled through the fallout from the altercation, they were compelled to face their personal demons and old grudges. What had once been a brotherhood based on trust and loyalty appeared to be disintegrating under the weight of ego, pride, and misunderstanding as unspoken resentments and feelings of betrayal started to surface. It was obvious that the road to reconciliation would not be an easy one. And even the most hopeful fans started to lose faith as the situation continued to spiral. Although neither rapper confirmed nor denied the rumors, it was evident that Dipset's future was uncertain as more time went on, and it became clear that the group was no longer the powerhouse that its fans had known it was. Some sources claimed that Cameron had already begun working on new music without Jim Jones, while others suggested that Jim Jones was considering a solo career. The last straw was when Jim Jones and Cameron both shared cryptic messages on social media, essentially confirming that their working relationship was over. Jim Jones wrote, "Sometimes it's not about being right, it's about moving on." Cameron's message read, "Sometimes you've got to let go. There's no love lost, but it's time to move forward." Although Cameron and Jim Jones had once been inseparable, their altercation had shown that even the strongest bonds could be broken, leaving fans devastated but also accepting that Dipset was no longer a viable group. It marked the end of an era that had been full of groundbreaking music, unforgettable moments, and an undeniable cultural influence. Impact. But as the chapter ended on Dipset, there was still a question. Would Cameron and Jim Jones ever get back together? Only time would tell. But it appeared that Dipset was over. The backstage altercation between Cameron and Jim Jones left fans in shock, given all the drama, betrayals, and heartache. Do you think Cameron and Jim Jones can ever get back together? Or is this the end of Dipset for good? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you were taken aback by the dramatic turn of events, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more breaking news. We'll keep you informed of all the most recent events involving Cameron, Jim Jones, and Dipset's future. If you're a true fan of the band, you won't want to miss anything exciting, so hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a juicy update. If you want to continue the conversation, share this video with your friends, and let's discuss what went down until the next time. Keep checking back for more drama, updates, and everything. You won't want to miss this buzz from the entertainment industry.